I can tell you the difference in the environment then and now is just what you would expect, but it's remarkable. We didn't have the confidence, we didn't have the base that this company now has to build on. It's really an awkward thing to go out on an interview for a project of which you had no experience. You know, I don't know what it would be, but that happened to us often, and you really feel lonely.
It was like a family. Back then, we were much smaller. When I started, I think we were close to 50 people.
I was gonna say polishing Mark Shapiro's giant black cowboy boots was my first job at BNIM.
I was charged with actually physically drawing the plans. The design had already pretty much been done by the time I arrived on the project, but I sat down, and then I also was the one who did all the delineated rendered drawings for the project, so all the presentation drawings. So I had the rapidograph and ink and did all the detailed drawings for presentations.
When I started at BNIM, we had just invested in our first computer system, and we had spent $150,000 buying a single workstation, basically. And it was kept in a dark room, and people worked double shifts so we could afford to pay for it.
Research was different because obviously you were doing research by either going to the library or actually trying to find material, not just getting online and just doing instantaneous research, which is so easy today to do. You relied, I think, more on people with more experience because of that inability to get research quickly, that you had to rely on other people rather than just going and finding it yourself.
When I started in 1990, I believe that there was one female architect.
It was a male-dominated culture and practice at the time.
Marketing was not very significant in architecture firms. It was still sort of in its infancy.
Marketing was an entirely different thing then, but that existed, done mostly by the principals, one-on-one, face-to-face, personal associations.
Over time, I remember having a conversation with Tom Nelson that computers were here to stay and that someday there would be a computer on everyone's desk, including his, and he laughed at me.
As I got more into the practice, getting familiar with things like SketchUp, and a few years into practice is when we started looking at Revit here at BNIM.
CAD was going away, Revit was coming in, they didn't know what to teach. I mean, it was certainly more architecture centric. There wasn't as much going on the planning front and on the landscape front. I mean, there were projects, but I also just don't think there weren't quite as many projects that were really saturated in terms of the multidisciplinary.
And that was an interesting experience to get introduced to the practice of the firm at a much larger scale that, of course, right now I'm very much focused on details of one building, even one wing of one building, and some days, but to understand and be reminded of where architecture fits in the larger scheme of a design practice.
There's certain things you can't learn in school in terms of the complexity of the built environment and how many people it takes to realize a project and how much more complicated that project can get.
We're seduced by technology in a way, but it doesn't really solve the problem of how do you build the building, and that's the part that worries me the most, that the ease of making a building look like it's finished versus really being finished, there's a huge gap in there.
More generally, communication is the primary tool of design. It might be simple to say, but it's something that I'm reminded of very frequently.
I think that what we're expected to know and bring to the table just keeps getting more and more deep every year.
It's funny how they use architecture now as a term, sort of outside of the built environment. And I think what we see clients are looking for today are more than just architects. They want people who are really thinking beyond the built environment, who are looking at helping them change how they do things.